first, we have one of my very good friends and somebody I admire very much, Rupa Bhattacharya, a transformative change agent. She is wonderful. Please give her a round of applause as she joins me on stage.
Thank you so much, Danny. Can you all hear me? Honestly, when people ask me what I want to be when I grow up, the answer is I want to live up like half as much to the way Danny's introductions make me sound. So I'm going to work on that today. So hi, everybody. Like Danny said, I'm a transformative change consultant. And basically what I do is I help institutions humanize their sustainability work, mostly in the food space. And that can mean a lot of things depending upon the institution and their particular needs. But on the simplest level, it means helping folks take their inherent fundamental knowledge that people are human and remember and honor that when they're building structures in the space. And like, I know that sounds really obvious. We know intellectually people are human. Kurt from Food Court made a really good point about it earlier, about understanding that we're talking about people when we talk about these systems. But it's a really easy thing to lose sight of in a space like this one, especially that has been sort of haunted historically by this almost ghost of the Platonic ideal. Like there's this notion that there's this like a single best thing that we can do. There's a single best diet. There's a single best whatever it is, single best creme brulee, right? Like there's a Platonic ideal. It has to be X, Y, and Z. Our tech friends might call it optimized, you know, whatever your word is. But basically, like in culinary school, right? Like they tell you it's got to be like, you know, this consistency is the right shade of brown, no bubbles on the outside, crack with this amount of pressure. And once you've named those characteristics and told people about them, basically the idea has always been all you have to do is tell people, hey, guess what? It should be this shade of brown. It should crack with this much pressure. This is what you should be eating. The end, boom, done. And like, that's it, right? Like audiences will just take that. They'll accept it. They'll be delighted. They will make those changes. All they needed was the information, and there we go. But that's not actually how any of this really works, right? At one point that might have worked, right? At one point restaurants might have had like a narrow enough audience, the people with the financial capital to go to these restaurants and the cultural capital to understand that when they're being served the Platonic ideal food item, that basically like the biggest issue was ever going to be like, are we going to order that Platonic ideal creme brulee or the Platonic ideal like souffle, right? Like that was going to be the beginning and ending of like what you needed to do to serve your audience well. But that audience has changed, right? In like a lot of ways for the better. I mean, you all who operate restaurants know this better than I do. The audience, the restaurant audience is both bigger and broader, and somehow both more and less educated than it has ever been in the past. I think like I blame TikTok, but like I'm sure there's many of reasons that things you can blame. But as a result of it, like the audience is also much more discerning and much more demanding than they ever have been in the past. So now what, right? Like what do we do about that? What do we do about the fact that this audience that we have knows what they want? They have their identity is really tied up in the things that they eat, the things that they desire, and how do we make those shifts and how do we make them meaningful? Something that like we all have to think about now, I think, is that given this new audience and between what they want, what they're used to getting, and what they can afford, some of the ways we can most successfully shift diners through more climate-friendly options is a combination of language and structure. I mostly want to talk about structure here. There's some people doing really wonderful work in the language space. If you guys haven't seen Food for Climate League's work, you absolutely should look it up. But talking about structure, I want to talk. We're also, as an industry, I think, doing a lot of catch-up from where the structures we built have failed us in the past. And to do that, I kind of want to talk about the portobello mushroom and that era. Do you guys remember when the portobello mushroom was going to save all of us, right? Like, all we were going to do, it was just going to be like, we were going to swap out animal protein, we were going to sear off a mushroom cap, give it the nice little cross-heart edges, you'd call it a day, you know, customers were going to accept that, it was going to be great. But they didn't, right? But, like, and why not, right? Because the portobello isn't actually a one-to-one swap for a steak. And we're doing, like, both customers and, frankly, the portobello itself a huge disservice here, right? Like, how do you change any system of power, right? Like, is it enough to just be like, I'm going to take this thing at the top or the center, the steak, and swap it out for this other thing, right? Does that work? I mean, even if it's a great portobello, if it's the best portobello you've ever had, it's still, like, quite simply not a steak. And it doesn't have the years, the lore, and the cultural meaning the steak has, like, built up around it, right? So, like, how do you solve that? You kind of really do have to treat it like any other system of power. It's not enough to change the thing at the top or the thing at the center. You actually have to scrap the existing infrastructure. In this case, the infrastructure is like the notion that a meal is a starch, a vegetable, and a thing at the center, right? And you kind of got to start over in a way that actually sets the portobello mushroom up for success. And like, so instead of like shoehorning the portobello into this paradigm where it can't win, Like maybe you're actually selling it like a beautiful mushroom stew that's like set off by all of its other components. It's the star of the show, and it's something people, not like something people are settling for, not like, oh, we took your thing and gave you this other thing. It's like, oh no, you got this special thing. You got this really cool, beautiful stew, right? It's like, do you remember when Shake Shack first launched? They had that shroom burger, and that was the first mushroom burger that kind of made that difference, right? But it's because, I mean, to be clear, they were stuffing it with cheese and deep frying it, right? Like, awesome. But, but it went from this, like, sort of, like, sad excuse for, like, oh, you can't have a burger, sorry, here's your mushroom, to, like, something, like, people went to, and, like, they sought it out. It's like, oh, you have to try this thing, right? And, like, it made itself a standalone attraction in its own right. So, like, the question is then, like, what can we do as chefs and as people to like build new structures where these new dishes or new approaches can thrive? In order to do that, I really think that we have to take a hard look at our tolerance for discarding old concepts if they no longer provide that base for success, right? Even if we love them, even if we're attached to them, even if we think that our audience can't imagine a world without a steak at the center of the plate, we really have to, our willingness to make these decisions about what systems and what structures are actually still suiting us, and many people here. And I really appreciate being at a climate event where other people are talking about scrapping up structures and starting again, because usually it's just me up here yelling. So I really appreciate it. But many of the other speakers have said this, where we have to look at the structures. We can't just shoehorn other things into the systems that we have existing, right? Because if you're just out here serving portobellos and not making them room for them to be anything other than steak, you're kind of burning the bridge of trust that your consumer has to you. And then it becomes harder for everybody else down the line to maybe serve like a morel or a chanterelle or whatever, because we all know what happened with the portobellos, and we don't want to do that. And that's sort of where I think this like very heavy-handed metaphor kind of ends up. I know, ask me how I spent 2020. I know it's heavy-handed, but also there's a lot riding on our ability to make the change, right? I truly believe that our success in changing our menus, our field, and ultimately the world, to be entirely contingent on what systems we're willing to recognize no longer serve us, and then in turn, our willingness to dismantle those systems. We have an entire generation coming up right now that has never known a world outside of climate change, and who see right through the paper straw stuff. Again, thank you, TikTok. And I think are really looking to us, like the adults in the room, to take a meaningful lead. And so I really want to invite everybody here to join me in taking that lead and start to think about what structures you personally can dismantle and rebuild in service of the world we all want to live in someday. 0 seconds left. So thank you so much for having me. If I can help you in any way, please let me know.
Woo! Give it up for Rupa.